I'm going to kick off this meeting, and I'm really happy and blessed, I would say, that wherever I have went to learn more about the generative AI, and everyone is excited to share their knowledge and show the path that where the world is going towards. This is an exciting moment, and I really thank Eduardo to join and be present in this meetup group over here to share his knowledge. Interestingly, Eduardo is from Spain, so it's now we are continent, right? Not only within US, so intercontinent. I'm based out of New Jersey. Eduardo is in Spain, Madrid, Spain, and we all know Madrid. We are all football followers, and we love football as well. So, being said that, I'll kick off this meeting. So, the way we do it is we go through agenda, and the agenda looks something like this. And then Eduardo, floor is all yours. So this is our 11th episode. Topic of the day is MLOps. Our guest speaker is Eduardo from AWS, Amazon. Eduardo, you are also an ex-Vodafone. We have spent a lot of time in Vodafone. For me, I am Ujjwal Bhattacharjee. I work in the financial industry with 20 plus years of experience. But this has got nothing to do with my employer. This is more of like my own initiative to expand, connect, meet people, and also learn about the technology. So the video recording will be stored in Curious Circuits as a YouTube channel. So this is where we are going to have this video recording if someone wants to see it. So typically, the way we do it is a quick introduction, which I already did. We'll do some disclaimer, housekeeping, participant introduction, and then we'll jump into the topic of the day. And then we'll have some open floor discussion. The disclaimer is this is my own initiative, nothing to do with my employer. Housekeeping is microphone will ask everyone to be on mute. Camera is optional, but feel free to be on camera so that we can see you. You can raise the hand for any questions. The chat function is also there. And so let's connect. So let's little bit know about Eduardo. Who is Eduardo? So Eduardo, and I was asking Eduardo, give me a few points about your experience. And so these are the few things that I saw, right? A strong technical foundation with 15 years of or more extensive experience in sales and business development. Computer scientist, sales guru, tech whiz, love the dynamic turns my career has taken. So we would like to know those about those as well. Artificial intelligence isn't just a field of work for me, it's a passion. So that's beautiful. My main mission, bridging the gap between the intricate world of AI, its practical everyday applications. I work as an AI/ML go-to-market EMEA lead at AWS. So we are blessed. Thank you so much, Eduardo, for taking the time out. This is how you can connect to Eduardo if you feel free. So this is the LinkedIn QR code. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. So now we'll before jumping into the topic, we'll do a quick round of participant introduction. So that way, Eduardo knows who is the group of people they're talking to. So I'll go through the screen real quick. Just give a one-liner for our speaker to understand you. So I'll start with Savita. So Savita, if you can just give a one-liner, if you don't mind.
Hi, I'm a software engineer and I've been working as software engineer for about 20 years and wanted to attend this session because everyone is talking about GenAI and all this. So wanted to attend this session.
Awesome. Christine G.
Hi everyone, I'm in IT for 23 years. I'm in the data science, so this is also just an extension of my career. Nice to meet you guys.
Awesome. I'll go next. Daniel Walters.
Hey everybody, I'm Daniel, and I'm a digital media and digital marketing expert. I've been really interested in AI recently and just the ways I could incorporate that into my workflow. So I'm just really excited to see what I can learn today.
Hi, this is Harsha. Right now I'm doing my master's in NYIT. Previously, I have 3 years of experience back in India as a data scientist. Right now, I was doing a research assistantship in my college. Yeah, that's it all about.
Okay. John.
Hi, so I've worked in both data science and data engineering. That's the area, and I've worked in finance.
Okay. Awesome. Nafisa.
Hi, I am Nafisa. I'm currently doing my master's in data science from Columbia University, and I'm very interested towards getting into the field of GenAI. So nice to meet you guys, and I really look forward to attend everything in the session.
And last but not the least, Joe.
Hi, good afternoon. So I'm based on what I've heard so far, my background is a little different. I come from a solution engineer and sales background, and my company, Lumen Technology, our goal is to basically help customers with their adoption of a little AI and big AI, or AGI, to leverage our platforms to be able to facilitate better outcomes that they're looking for, improve productivity. So I'm here to increase my knowledge.
Okay, awesome. So Eduardo, so that's your audience, and so floor is all yours. Take it off. Let's kick it off from here, and let's hear from you.
Thank you so much. And first of all, I really appreciate you have brought me here. So it's a pleasure to be with so many folks from the US. I usually work every day with people in your site, and I really love it. So let me start sharing my screen if I'm able to find.
Yeah, the picture really shows that you are on a mission.
Okay, let me put it on presentation mode. Okay, there we go. As you said, I'm working as a go-to-market specialist for AI ML in 3-4 years. I've been very focused on MLOps, and despite I have a technical background, I used to help customers more from the strategic point of view, okay? And this is one of the main challenges that I'm facing on my day-to-day. Most of the times we are just having technology conversations that still is fine, but there are many aspects that they are not covered, like change management, skills, strategy, and this is very important to AI, especially when we are talking to MLOps, right? And even right now, because of generative AI, there are these new concepts coming on around LLMOps, FMOps, GenOps, and today my goal it could be to try to explain in a very easy manner why MLOps apply to generative AI. It's important, okay? Not only from the technical point of view, but also from a strategic point of view, and what are the different aspects, okay, that we need to cover. And if we still have some time, trying to deep dive a bit as well on MLOps. I know we have a lot of variety of people joining the meeting, more technical backgrounds, less technical backgrounds. So I'll try to make it very simple. And as I said, I'm not a developer. I used to be a developer in the past. I was so bad coding. And that's why I decided that it was not my career to be coding all the time. So let's try to make it simple, okay? And I really like to start most of my talks when I'm talking about, okay, what is the situation in the market right now? Because everyone is talking about generative AI. And the reality is 80%, these numbers are coming from Deloitte, right? And 80% of the customers, they're expecting that generative AI is going to transform their organizations in the next 3 years. But at the same time, the reality is they are trying to get value right now, today. So they are trying to improve efficiency and productivity, to reduce costs, to improve products and services. So they are talking to transform the business on the next 3 years. But the reality is the value they wanted to get it today. And that's why I said that LLMOps is going to be very important, because we are not talking about 3 years ahead, but we are talking about today. And of course, they are trying to see how to transform the business through innovation, building new products and cover ideas. But this is just to reflect what is the situation. 30% of the customers, 14 plus 17%, they are expecting that in less than 1 year, okay, generative AI is going to transform radically their business. And when we're talking about transform the business, we are not talking about building POCs. And this is what is happening most of the time. I'm talking to customers across the world, to be honest, many customers in EMEA, UK, Germany, Israel, but also in the US, right? Probably in the US, you guys are more mature right now when we are talking about AI in general. The difference with generative AI is more or less every customer has started at the same time. The starting point is more or less the same thing. And many of them, they were building POCs just to prove the value of generative AI. But after 14, 12 months, they are still there. So they are saying hey, we need to leverage generative AI, but they are still playing with different POCs. So if they are expecting that generative AI is going to transform the business in the next year, you need to take a different approach. It's not enough just building POCs. It's fine, it's nice, it's great to prove the value, but they need to take the next steps. And that's why what I'm saying, especially for these customers that they are trying to take the next step, they need to implement LLM practices. And we are going to see today what we mean by talking about LLMOps, FMOps. I also try like to differentiate between like different topics or concepts, because out there, most of the people is talking about LLMOps, but I would say it's not still accurate, but we will see it later. So what we are seeing today in terms of like readiness for adoption. If you remember when we were talking about MLOps, or in the past when like folks used to talk around MLOps, they used to split MLOps across like four main pillars. It was about people and strategy, it was about processes, and it was about technology. So they used to say MLOps is like a set of practices, and by set of practices like people, process, technology, in order to scale the adoption of artificial intelligence. So that was MLOps. And there is not big difference with LLMOps or GenOps or FMOps. So when we are talking customers and when we're asking customers where you are in these different pillars, they are telling like in terms of technology, they are not so far. And probably they're not so far because like starting working with generative AI, it's very simple. In comparison to traditional ML that you maybe need to build your models, need to deploy your models, with generative AI, it's pretty straightforward. Like everyone can do prompt engineering, everyone can take a model that it's already deployed, you can interact via API. So it's pretty simple, right? So in terms of technology, or at least what the customers think the technology they need, they are more or less right. Like 50% of them, 40%, they are already ready. In terms of strategy, the numbers goes down a bit, okay? So we are talking about technology, we are talking about strategy, but still we are missing some parts. When we're talking about people on MLOps, it's the same thing for LMOps. So they don't have the right skills in place. So they have started like from the point of view of building POCs. Okay, I'm hiring prompt engineers, I'm hiring data scientists, but then they realize that the way they need to move into production, they are still missing like some important roles, right? So they don't have the right skills in place. They are also facing some challenges in terms of like risk and governance. So for many customers, my conversations before moving into production is not even sometimes about the technology, but it's about the legal implications of like putting, for example, a chatbot into production. If you are familiar with the recent case from Air Canada, these are the kind of things that like customers need to take into account. If I'm deploying a chatbot that is providing answers to the customers, who is responsible for the answers? Is the provider of the model? Is the company? So these kind of like considerations, they are very relevant because you don't have full control of these systems, right? So many times it's like just about risk and governance. And as a consequence, only 10% of the customers, they say they are ready to move into production. Even they are not moving into production, only 10%, they say they are ready to move into production. So what is the reality? The reality is like what I call the cool guys. Only 5% right now of the customers that they were building like POCs have moved successfully into production. That's why I say these are the cool guys. Still, there are like many people here that is around like 50, 60%. They are still like playing around with generative AI. And I used to say, okay, this was okay in the past, but right now they need to deliver results. So they cannot be playing over and over again with generative AI. The smart guys, the smart customers, what they are doing is piloting generative AI with internal users. And it's pretty much smart because at least you have control about what is going to happen. You cannot expose these models to external customers, to end customers. So if you want to increase employee productivity, let's pilot it internally. You can get feedback directly from your employees, and you can see how you are going to take the next steps. There are still some brave guys that they are like the guys who are piloting with external customers. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a customer here in Spain. It's very similar to Delivery Hero, and they were expecting to build a chat for external users, end users, and customers as a first step, even before piloting with internal users. I think that's quite a bit risky, right? But something that also I think is like many customers, they are not moving into production yet because they are seeing what others are doing. As soon as we see more people moving into production, deploying chatbots, probably the curve is going to be like exponential. So this is why we need generative AI operations to make sure the people is moving like from the red bar into the others. And the guys that like they are not doing anything with generative AI, I usually say like these people are in trouble because sooner than later, they will see they need to transform this business. So I post this picture in LinkedIn, I think it was last week. And when I was working on MLOps, I really love this paper that it was written by Google many years ago. I think it was 2015 about technical debt in machine learning systems. And by that time, people used to say, yeah, the machine learning code, the piece of the code of the model is not as important because there are like many different components that you need to orchestrate, right? And that was very curious to me because when I started working in this space of artificial intelligence, I was like a data scientist for a very short amount of time. And I remember that the first thing that I realized, it was like, hey, building a model is pretty simple. You have a lot of different libraries, you can go through an XGBoost, whatever, and you can just build more or less like the better or worse, but you can build a machine learning model. But I realized that the most complex part, it was like to productionize this model. I think with generative AI, this is happening even more because in the past, the machine learning models were not like as important as they are becoming right now. And that's why all the people is talking about how good GPT is, or it's better Claude, or it's better Mistral. And there's like a big competition across the model. And makes sense because these models, they are like doing, or they are able to make like really nice things like different tasks, codings, memorization, language, images. So they are pretty important. But the problem is like the people still think the model is the center of everything. And when you move into a production environment, you realize about the huge amount of components that you need to orchestrate together. And today, the idea is to cover some of them, right? But just as an example, it's not just using a foundation model like Claude or GPT or Mistral or Llama. It's about how you are going to evaluate the model. Evaluating these models, they are much more complex than evaluating your like traditional ML models. Or in something that is coming before, is like how to select the right model, because most of the times what is happening right now is like all the people is going to take the Ferrari. And by the Ferrari, like using, for example, GPT, because they know like it's the best model out there. And it makes sense. If I have the option to decide, I always prefer to drive the Ferrari. The problem is like if I need to go to the supermarket, I don't have place to park, or the insurance is very expensive, maybe I need to change the Ferrari for like a more useful car. So this is what is happening with generative AI. So we need to define the framework to select the right model. We need to manage the hallucinations. We need to manage like how to monitor the model, how to monitor the input queries, the responses, how to manage the prompts. I remember almost a year ago, I was in London following also a meetup about like prompt engineering. And they were talking about the art of prompt engineering. And by that time, they were saying like, hey, you don't need like any technical background to do prompting. It's more like art. And I was like quite surprised, like saying, hey, this cannot be art. Like, this is at the end of the day, this is like a lot of code behind the scenes. Like, we cannot do art with prompt engineering, especially if we are going to like to leverage generative AI for very like complex scenarios. And the reality is like prompt is not an art. Of course, there is like a small part of art, as it can be in many other disciplines, but you need to do prompt engineering following, as the title says, engineering practices. You need to version your prompt. You need to track the results. You need to monitor. If we put all together these components, we will realize generative AI is much more than just a simple model. Of course, the model, it may be very important, but especially in corporate scenarios, when working with big enterprises, the foundation model is not as important as all the other components. And that's also one of the other things that I've learned over the time is like generative AI probably has started by the consumer side, by like starting working with ChatGPT and all these things. And probably the approach that we need to take with like working in big enterprise, it's completely different, right? What is generative AI operations? And I think this aspect is very important because when I'm talking out there and when I'm listening to people, there is still a lot of not agreement on what it's exactly LLMOps or FMOps or GenOps. So I am starting to call everything GenOps because GenOps for me is, okay, how to operationalize generative AI applications. And what are the different components? If you remember MLOps, it was something that it was created, or we used to say MLOps is DevOps practices applied to ML systems. And that makes sense because DevOps was not able to cover everything, right? So With GenOps, the same thing. We have this layer at the top that is DevOps that is going to cover many different aspects like good practices when building software, CI/CD, all these kind of things that we need still to put in place, right? We also have MLOps because it's not only about like calling a model via API. We may need to deploy our foundation models. We need to fine tune the model. So MLOps is still required. We need to track the experiments. We need to implement A/B testing canary. So that's why MLOps is still required. Maybe in some scenarios, it's going to be used just a very small fraction. If you are using, for example, a model via API, in other scenarios, maybe we are going to use it much more, right? And then we have FMOps. And I call it FMOps, not LLMOps, because LLMOps is, strictly speaking, it's only for large language models. But there are many different models. And we have this new concept around multimodality models, right? So for me, I used to say, okay, FMOps, it may be large, it may be small. Let's call it foundation model that is going to cover all different aspects that we have seen before. Okay, how to manage prompt, how to do fine tuning, human in the loop, RAG, etc., etc. And then we have still a small box that is about building our generative AI application. So we have put in place MLOps, FMOps, but we still need to build like our generative AI application. We may change many different applications. We may define guardrails, and many aspects is going to be inherited by DevOps in terms of like CI/CD, all these kind of things, but still many new practices out there, right? So for me, this is the picture when I'm talking about generative AI operations, because there are many aspects that are completely new. Even there are like new roles, like prompt engineers, that it's completely new to what we have seen before, right? So this is more or less to define, okay, the picture about what we are going to need when we are trying to operationalize generative AI applications. However, there are many different ways to do it. I know it may be very complex. I'm not going to cover everything today, but just to give you the highlights, right? When I was talking about MLOps, I used to define like different levels of maturity. And if we have some time later, I can uncover it, right? From known expertise into the beginner phase and a scalable phase where we are like deploying AI at the scale, right? So what I try to do is, okay, let's try to reuse what it's MLOps into generative AI operations. And what we have done is to build, because I think this is the easiest way to understand what are the user journeys that we can take when we are working with generative AI, because there are different levels of maturity. And I'm not saying like everyone in the future, they need to train their own foundation model. Doesn't make sense, right? But we can start simple, and from there, we can make it a bit more complicated. So as you can see here, we have what we call end users that they are using like generative AI applications, or they are using applications powered by generative AI. We have consumers from foundation models that they are going to build their own applications. We have advanced consumers, the ones that they are like consuming foundation models, but I call them advanced because they are deploying the foundation models. And I know deploying a foundation model, it may have some kind of complexity. And finally, we have the providers, the ones that they are training these models, let's call Anthropic, OpenAI, but also like what I call them heavy tuners. Okay, I'm taking a Llama model and almost I'm building a new one from scratch, like Vicuna or Alpaca, all these kind of models. So take a look, very simple, about how this journey looks like, because for me, this is the most educational way to explain people how this is going to work. So the most simple scenario, I'm an end user, right? So I'm a user that I'm going to use an application that is powered by generative AI, by a foundation model, but I don't need to know it. Like I'm just using an application. So if I'm using ChatGPT, I'm an end user, right? So this is the most simple way to interact with generative AI. And most of the people right now, if we left behind technical people, they are like consumers. You are using Runway, you are using LinkedIn, you are using Canva. All these applications, they are using behind the scenes generative AI. And I don't need to have any kind of knowledge, right? This is the most simple way to start working with generative AI. And I just put an example here about Amazon Q, that is one of our services. So which is the next level? The next level is to be the consumer. And the consumer, how it's going to work? First of all, they need to identify the business problem. And the business problem may be like, okay, I want to improve the productivity of my employees. Okay, that's the business problem. Next step is to select the foundation model that they're going to use for the business problem. And as I said here, I'm talking about like API model, because the model is already there. I don't need to deploy the model. I don't need to manage any kind of infrastructure. Let's make it simple. So I need to select the model. Once I select the model, first thing that I'm going to do is to do some kind of like prompt engineering to see how the model is going to perform, to see if it's going to go well or not. So I can try 3, 4, 5 different models. Okay, I can try Mistral, I can try Claude, I can try GPT, and based on latency, cost, performance, I can decide. But we need to make it simple, just with some prompts that we will feed to the model. And then we will evaluate, are the results okay or not? If they are not okay, I may take different approaches. Okay, I can go and select a different model, or I can say, okay, let's try to do some fine-tuning. And by fine-tuning here again, I'm talking about fine-tuning in a very simple manner. I'm not deploying a model. I'm just talking to a model via API. I can give to the model some label examples and say, hey, based on the label examples that I have, just try to rebuild this model to make it more capable or more specific for this task. So let's say I want to analyze customer conversations. So I want to do like this conversation analytics. So I will submit hundreds of examples of like label examples from my agents to say, okay, these are like the different parameters that I measure. I will submit to the model. I will fine tune the model, and I'm going to have like an improved version of the model. Or maybe I can implement RAG because like it's okay, I want to avoid hallucinations, or I want to implement like an internal chatbot to check, for example, like different internal policies. What makes sense is like to recover this data from like internal documents and augment your answer by like querying this data. So it may be the approach. If the results are okay, after that, I can start working, building my generative AI application, the bot, whatever. And then, and probably like very important, and nobody's doing this. Actually, nobody was doing. So I think even like for generative AI, it's even worse, right? And the last step is to monitor the model. So this is the consumer side. And I would say 90% of the customers that they are working with generative AI, they are here. They are working as a consumer. And one example is Amazon Vetro, that is our service to interact with foundation models via API, completely serverless. Next step, let's take like another step of maturity. These are the advanced consumers. And for this, you need proper MLOps foundations. You need proper practices to make sure that you can deploy models at a scale, because it's not only to build your generative AI applications, but it's first to deploy your foundations models that you will use later, like to build your generative AI application. So first of all, again, it's about to define the business problem. Models, there are a lot of them. So it's again the same part, okay? We need to select the model. We will go to a model hub, we will select the model. We need to store this model in a model registry. This is from the customer side, okay? I'm going to host this model in my own infra, and I'm talking about the model registry because I may keep different versions of the model. So I need to keep it in the right manner to make sure that if I'm managing many different applications, I can keep track about all different versions of the models. Then I will deploy the model. So in the previous step, in the previous journey, the model was already there. I was just calling the model via API. Here, it's different. I need to deploy the model. I need to know who is going to approve the model. I need to have a pre-production environment, a production environment. That's why here it's very important to define and to implement MLOps practices. Then it's still more or less the same. Once the model is deployed, it's very similar to the previous journeys. Okay, I will do some kind of prompt engineering. I will do some kind of model evaluation. If the results are not correct, I will do fine-tuning. But again, here, fine-tuning, it's a bit different because I'm not just submitting like some unlabeled data or labeled data to the model to do this API fine-tuning. I need to build an end-to-end pipeline. I need to label the data. I need to do pre-processing job. I need to do fine-tuning, and this fine-tuning is going to be like a huge amount or a huge training workload, right? And then I need to do the post-processing and create the model and store the model in the model registry. So this part, it was like pure traditional MLOps. Then It's not about like managing a big notebook with a lot of different like code. You need to do like proper things like managing different steps, building the pipeline, making sure the pipeline is going to be triggered only by CI/CD, that the pipeline is going to produce a model that is going to be stored in the model registry. That's why here, the advanced consumers, they need to put in place this kind of what we call MLOps practices. And once everything is in place, I will start building the generative AI applications. For these customers, I used to say they are using SageMaker, right? Because they need this kind of flexibility and customization where they need to do everything. And also for some customers, because of privacy reasons or security reasons, they need to deploy the models in their own infra. I know some customers, they cannot like call models via API because they cannot expose their data to like models that they are out there. So that's why they need to take this approach. And this could be like 9%, 9.9% of the customers. Remember, 90% they are calling like models via API, 9.9 they are what we call advanced users, and 0.1 are the ones that are just like building models. What we call these foundation model providers, OpenAI, Anthropic, or these heavy tuners, because even if you go to Hugging Face every single day, you will see like new models that they are out persisting ones by like fine-tuning models, like doing very heavy fine-tuning jobs, right? But this is not important for us. Like these are the guys that they require you like very high knowledge in terms of research, data science, etc., etc., etc. So let's begin about what I call by FMOps. Remember, we were talking about generative AI operations. There is a part of DevOps, a part of MLOps. Let's see what it's FMOps, right? And what are the practices that we need to put in place when trying to productionize generative AI applications? As I said before, most of the customers, they are just concerned about the model. And they are just going to the same model all the time. GPT, Claude, Mistral, there are much more models out there, right? So first of all is to define the framework to select the right model. Of course, you have something that is called model cards in Hugging Face, in Azure, in Vetro. So you need to know, first of all, which is the modality, which is the purpose that you are going to take. It's about vision, it's about language, it's about multimodality. You need to check if the model is going to perform for a specific task or for generic tasks, because there are some models that they are built for a specific tasks, because they are like instruct models or models for chat. So you need to know which approach to take. Then you need to know is, okay, you are going to use an open source model or a proprietary model. Because if it's open source, you can deploy the model, you can recalculate all the weights, you can do all the fine tuning. It's open and you can use it in the way that you want. But maybe you need to smart like a sooner, faster, quicker, simple, and you go through a proprietary model that it's available via API. Some models, they have license. Some models, they are available to use for commercial purposes. Some models you can fine tune and some models don't. And finally, you need to talk about, or you need to consider these 4 or 5 different aspects. Latency of the model, number of parameters, of course, number of parameters and latency, they are like very related to each other. The context window, so how long is the input that I can submit to my model? And remember, it's not only the input query, but it's also the prompt engineering layer that you are doing before. Because if you are doing only prompt engineering, you are going to submit your query, and after that, you have like all the prompting that you are doing before, right? Context window is important, but also longer context window, they are going to take more latency. For example, Gemini announced that it's going to have a million context window, but of course it's taking longer to process it, right? And it's about cost and it's about data. So this is something like this is going to help us to select the model. Next step is to evaluate the model. As I said before, evaluating models is not simple. It's not straightforward. Like with traditional ML, it was more or less easy. You have F1 score, accuracy, AISU, but with generative AI, it's a bit more different. So we need to think, okay, do we have the ground truth? So do we have the label data you like to evaluate the model? If we have the ground truth, we need to ask, does the model provide discrete outputs? So if it's pure, let's say, classification, we can use the traditional metrics like precision, F1 score, accuracy. If we don't have discrete outputs, we need to start talking about like different metrics like hand, rows, distant metrics, that they are a bit more complicated to understand. Let's say we don't have the ground truth. So if we want to automate the process, we can use another LLM to evaluate the previous LLM. And that can be, or that can sound a bit tricky because it's okay, I'm cheating the model with another model. But the reality is like in many aspects, this is working pretty well and you are automating the process. And if you don't have time constraints, you can use standalone metrics, okay? You don't want to automate the process. So you can evaluate metrics about like text quality, readability, complexity, grade level. And the best option, but of course is the most costly and it takes longer, is human in the loop. Having people to say like, hey, it's good, it's not good, or from 1 to 5, I'm going to provide 4 or 5. If you have 1,000 or hundreds of thousands of examples, you cannot have people to rank everything. So these are the different approaches to evaluate the different models. And how to start, right? How to start when we are working with generative AI. So this is like a very simple approach. First of all, we need to use the model as it is, like with zero thought. Okay, I'm going to use the model to see how it's going to perform. Then we need to take the next level. That is about like doing some kind of basic prompt engineering. We will start with single examples, then we will start with a few examples, and then we can do this very advanced technique like self-consistency, chain of thought, that there are like many different approaches. Then we can implement RAG if it's needed. Then we can do fine-tuning, like the simple fine-tuning like PEFT or QLoRa. Then we can do full fine-tuning, and finally we can do initial training, like training the model from scratch. As soon as we move higher, we will get higher performance, but at the same time, the cost and the complexity is going to be higher. So you need to find the balance. RAG, for example, is going to get you like a lot of domain knowledge, and it's not very complex, right? With prompt engineering, it's very simple. You can start easy, but you are not getting like the domain knowledge. With fine-tuning, you get high level of specialization, but at the same time, you still need to get like some skills, some practice in place, etc., right? So when to use one or the other? Because many times people is asking me like, okay, when do I have to do fine-tuning? When do I have to do prompt engineering? When do I have to do RAG? So the reality is like, there is no single rule. I mean, like you can use only one or you can use the three of them at the same time. The reality is like when you are using the three of these different techniques, you are going to get the best outputs, right? But you need to know the pros and cons. For example, prompt engineering is very intuitive. It's very fast for building prototypes, and it's very flexible and it's efficient. But at the same time, you have some limitations with prompt engineering. For example, the context window, and that is not cost effective. The same for RAG. But RAG is also good for reduce the hallucinations. You can connect with external data sources. And with fine-tuning, you still have some problems because you can get overfitting and you require a lot of like specific skills, but you are going to adapt the model for getting like a good results for a specific task, for your domain knowledge, because we want to have models for your company. We don't want to have like GPT for saying, hey, write a poem for a 5-year-old boy. We want a model to perform well when I'm submitting a question related to my business. So based on these pros and cons, we need to define the best strategy. And the reality is like there are many different approaches. Based on cost of implementation, full fine-tuning is very costly. If we talk about complexity, the same thing. Full fine-tuning PEF is taking long time. But on the other side, for domain adaptation, it's going to be much better to do full fine-tuning or PEF. In the other side, if we are trying to get up-to-date responses, the best way to go is through prompt engineering or RAG. If we are going to get explainability, that, like with machine learning, it was very complex to get explainability, but more or less with sub-values, you will get some kind of understanding about why the model was taking this response. With generative AI, it's very complex, but at least if you are using RAG, you can say, okay, I'm getting this response because I got the answer from here, right? So for explainability, RAG is very good. The same to reduce hallucination. So taking a look to here, this will give you some clue about, okay, how to go. Next step is to do prompt engineering. As I said before, prompt engineering is much more complex than just crafting prompts. Like, this is a very simple life cycle when doing prompts. But when I start to create a new prompt, I'm not starting from scratch. I need to have a prompt template to start reusing it. It's the best way to go because you are going to reuse most of the prompts that you are going to build. You also need to have a collaboration space where many different data scientists, prompt engineers, they can collaborate together in crafting different prompts. You need to evaluate the prompts. You need to store the results of these prompts, and you need to compare and to refine and iterate. And once you are agreed with those prompts, you need to orchestrate all these prompts. You need to version the prompts. You need to know, okay, these specific prompts give these results. And as soon as I'm making change, this is like normal code. I need to push the code to the standard repository. So we need to do the same thing with the prompts. And then finally, we need to deploy all the prompts, and we need to keep track all the prompts in a prompt catalog, right? So as I said, it's in a very simple manner. Prompt engineering is much more than just crafting prompts, especially in a deployment or in a production environment. Same thing for RAG. People used to think like RAG is as simple as saying, okay, I'm going to ask something because I don't know the answer. I'm going to check the documents. I will get the answer and I will pop up to the model. So it's the same when you were trying to cheat during an exam. I don't know the answer. I will open the book and the answer is there. The reality is much more complex than that. I don't think there are many situations where you can implement very naive RAG. So RAG, I'm not going to spend time here. I shared this cheat sheet on RAG. I think it was like a couple of weeks ago. There are many different techniques for RAG, but it's not only for RAG, for retrieval. It's about like how you are going to chunk your documents, how you are going to select one vector database against each other, how you are going to generate the response, how you are going to evaluate. There are many different aspects that you need to take into account, right? But the same about building a vector database. You may start building a small vector databases for the use case, but this is something that is very complicated to manage. In the future, if you have the same thing that you have a central data lake for your organization, you may need to have a centralized vector database. So you need to move from more tactical approaches into more strategic approaches. And these are the kind of things that you need to take into account, right? And finally, it's about monitoring everything. It's not only monitoring the performance of the model, but it's to monitor the user input. Okay, what kind of like queries my end users are submitting? Because even I can detect data drift. Because if the kind of queries that I'm getting, they are changing over time, maybe my model is not going to perform in the same manner that it was performing at the beginning. We also need to monitor latency, number of requests. We need to monitor that, like I'm not submitting harmful content or toxic content to the model. And finally, I need to monitor like the normal performance of the models, as we have seen before, text quality, readability, these different standalone metrics. So monitoring is quite important here. You cannot go into production without a monitoring ecosystem for your platform, for your model, for your user inputs, for your user outputs. And that's why this is going to be one of the most important aspects. And finally, data, right? Data needs to be there. Most of the times right now, customers are just talking about the model. But as I said before, models are performing well in a very generic situation. We want to use our data. We want to use this use case data, this company data, to make sure in the future we can fine-tune small models and make it very good performance for our use case. So I guess in the future, we will move from like just talking about models and more talking about data, because the models, they are going to be outdated. And you can see that every single day, new models are being released. Like a couple of days ago, Mistral announced Mistral Alerts, and it's going to be the best model out there, of course, after GPT. But models are being released and they're getting outdated. But the data is going to be there forever. So if we can use our data in the way that our models are going to perform better in the future, I think that is going to be the key. So just to summarize, because I know we are getting to the end, this is just the summary that I would like to take today, right? So what I see out there in terms of generative AI, and especially in terms of generative AI operations, it's still very early days. Like people is still experimenting, but we start like what we're starting to see is like many customers moving, or at least more customers moving into production. And the innovation pace is huge. If you are working with generative AI, you need to be every single day taking into the news, going into Medium, LinkedIn to see what's going on there, right? Next thing, no single model can do everything. I think it's a huge mistake if you are taking one model for all your use cases, because you are limited to that. And that is not going to happen. You need flexibility, different providers, large models, small models. So don't try to think like one single model is going to solve all your problems. As I said before, in the past, we used to talk about, hey, look at the response for this model. It's amazing, right? But I think that is pretty well known. So we need to move from, hey, look at this response into look into this generative AI application. Customers are usually more successful and they are getting more savings when they are combining different models. So what we used to call it like routing to different models, especially in terms of cost. So as soon as you are getting the input from a customer, or you are getting like an input query, you can query this query or route this query to different models, because maybe, and this is a very good example, is Perplexity. Like I'm not using anymore Google. It's great because Perplexity, based on the complexity of the input query, they can route it to different models, right? Another important aspect that is going to evolve over time, I think, is like open source. Of course, there are like many proprietary models. Right now, most of the top leaderboards are covered by proprietary models, but there are like many open source models performing pretty well. And I think like in the next future, especially because of Meta, we are going to see a lot of advance on this area. And finally, generative AI is, even we like it or we don't, it's there. Like it's going to be there. It's there, it's going to be there, and it's going to be there for a long time. So it's key priority for customers. Don't think that this is just a hype. We are seeing that it's not a hype, and make sure that we can leverage all the potential. And I think that's all for today. Thank you so much. I'm not sure if we still have, I think we still have time for some questions.
I think this is the most powerful, informative session that I've ever seen in generative AI. You have covered it all. And I wish we discussed like 6 months back. This was really good. I'll quickly go to the questions that we have. How many customers do Finetuning? I think you answered that.
Very few,
0.01
very
or something
few.
like that, right?
Yeah, very few. Probably 1% of the customers, very few right now, very few. Or they are doing this very simple fine-tuning via API, but right now, very few. They are just doing prompt and RAG, and naive RAG most of the times.
Okay. You also mentioned about model registry. So I know AWS has this Bedrock, and we have a collection of models that we can use. We also have SageMaker, where we can come in, bring in the open source as well as some of the proprietary models. So when you say model registry, what does this mean? Like Bedrock or SageMaker? Like what are you talking about?
Model registry is, from one side, you have Model Hub. So Model Hub is where you store all different models. But model registry is... Yeah, correct.
You had the Hugging Face picture.
Correct. But the model registry is your own model registry, that you have SageMaker model registry or MLflow model registry. So model registry is your own bucket within your infrastructure to keep track of all the models. So you can store the models, for example, on an S3 bucket. But it's not a very good practice because, for example, when storing the models, you need to check, okay, who trained the model? When did you train the model? Which data did you use to train the model? Which is the version of the model? So a model registry is like a bucket to store models, but also all the metadata related to the model. So you have SageMaker model registry, MLflow model registry. It's a place to store the models that you are going to deploy later, even if it's foundation model or just like a classification model, let's say.
And we are only talking about open source in this case, because proprietary, we have to make that API.
Correct. Absolutely right.
Okay. So now next question that I have is, what about model upgrade? So if suppose I have built an application and I have this model, I have evaluated, did all the fine tuning, and suddenly Hugging Face releases another, or Meta releases another new version of the model, like a version 2. What happens to my ML workflow? It breaks.
This is one of the main problems. So if you have deployed the model, this is not affecting to you because it's your choice to deploy a new version of the model. So your generative AI application is going to keep working as it is right now. Different things like I'm using, for example, GPT, and OpenAI tomorrow release a new version. Maybe my prompts are not working in the same manner that they used to work. Of course, model providers, they try to keep track that like everything is going to work smoothly, but it's not 100% sure. That's one of the risks that customers may have. That the problem is like when they are releasing a new model or a new version, sometimes they are removing the previous one. So you don't have like full control about what's going on. So important thing, it's a very big risk right now.
So there is no clear-cut answer to that, right? So we have to like build our pipeline in a way so that I can quickly run all the evaluation metrics once again, and with all the prompt templates,
you should have a curated data set to evaluate the new model with your own prompts. That's a good practice, but you still need to try it.
I'll quickly go to the next question. So you mentioned about centralized vector DB, but when we go to large scale data lake kind of scenario, right? But what about like data isolation in that case? Are we going to have, I can have a HR data. So suppose I'm doing RAG on rules and regulations of an organization versus some HR data. So how do I isolate this data in a centralized vector database?
So most of the times, first thing is try to inherit all the practices, all the permissions, all the roles related to your data lake. So if somebody only have access to this data, they should have only access to this data in the vector database. That's the first thing you need to do. What is happening right now, it's being like a tactical approach. Okay, I have a use case. I'm going to build this vector database only for this use case. No permissions, no roles, nothing there. But they need to test that it's going to work, right? They are taking this approach, but this is going to evolve over time. So you can build vector databases for different business units. You still may have, okay, I'm going to build one vector database only for the use case. But in the future, the approach should be like, okay, I have a centralized data lake. I have a centralized vector database that it's inheriting all different policies, all different roles. And I may have the flexibility to say, okay, even if I have a central vector database, I can allow some users or some specific units to say, okay, for this specific use case, I can build a unique vector database. But it's going to have some operational overhead because you need to synchronize the data, you need to keep updated.
Do you know if AWS has something in the pipeline where they comes out of the box of the model MLOps, which seems like a very common requirement. Every customer will need that. I know AWS has this knowledge base and guardrails, things part of Bedrock, but is there something like where we can just put all the pieces together and build that MLOps pipeline?
That's a goal with Bedrock. So the goal with Bedrock in the future is to have services to cover all different aspects. Right now, we have some services to cover model evaluation, to provide guardrails, to implement knowledge bases. We are still missing some parts, for example, prompt management, monitoring. So the goal for Bedrock, but also the goal for many other platforms, is to be like end-to-end platforms for LLMOps or FMOps, not only about the foundation model, that was the first step by providing access to the model, but to cover all different aspects from like model evaluation, model selection into model monitoring.
There is another question over here. What does hallucination mean in the AI context?
Hallucinations? Yeah, I really love hallucinations because, like, that's the nice things about generative AI. Because of this kind of creativity, the models may hallucinate, but this is, if we remove all the hallucinations, we are removing the creativity part of the model. So the hallucinations essentially is when I'm asking the model to I'm trying to ask the model to answer something. If it doesn't know the answer, because they have been trained to be very able to provide always an answer, they are going to start pitching an answer even if they don't know. And that's when they are starting to hallucinate. I always say the same example. This is when I was going to an exam. They were asking something to me. I didn't know the answer, but still, like, I was very embarrassed to leave the answer blank. And I just replied something. So this is what the models are doing. And that's why it's very important to say, okay, use external sources, or to say the model, okay, if you don't know the answer, just say, I don't know the answer. But yeah, this is what we call by hallucinations.
Next question is, how does model evaluation take place? How many results set benchmark that we need to fine tune the model?
Yeah, as I
Very
said
broad
before,
question.
yeah, model evaluation, like, it's very complex. There are like many different metrics there. If you are going through ROS or Helm, there are many different metrics. If you go about this kind of standalone metrics like readability or complexity, so you need to get a balance. And probably the evaluation part, the one that is working better, is to put human in the loop. So you cannot evaluate all different answers, but my recommendation is at the beginning to go through a limited number of answers that you can evaluate with humans, so you can define what is working better, and then you can benchmark the human evaluation with these metrics. And you can establish some kind of correlation to say, like, okay, this is going to work much better. But at the end of the day, you need to establish different trade-offs. You don't have a model that is performing well in all different metrics. So for some metrics, it will be performing pretty well. For some others don't. So you need to establish these trade-offs and define what is going to work better for your use case.
In the previous slide, why do we always take customer feedback for training straight away? Do we also decide which customer feedback is fit to go ahead with the training? I don't know. Did you get the question?
I don't understand what it means. Why do we have to always take customer feedback? So when I'm talking about customer feedback, is if I'm using a model based on the customer feedback, I can make sure that the model is going to perform better in the future, right? What we call reinforcement learning with human feedback. So we are getting the feedback from the people to improve the performance of my model in the future. So the feedback is like this human in the loop, like this getting label example that we can improve the model. The main problem is like reinforcement learning with human feedback is not simple, it's not straightforward. And that requires a lot of time and so on. But that's the best practice. Like if GPT is performing pretty well, same for Claude, is because of this reinforcement learning.
One question over here is, what is your preferred vector database? I think there is no answer to that, right?
No answer to that, but I can share with you a great website from some colleagues that they have put in place all different vector databases where you can see the pros and cons. And that's pretty nice because even you may have like pure vector database, like Chroma, Webit, Quadrant, but you also have different vector for SQL, NoSQL, that they are also be used for vector database. So you have this list with 50, 60 different vector databases that you can see like which one is better for your use case. So it's a complex one. That's why when I was talking about RAG, that it involves many different aspects. So it's quite complex, and many times it's about try and see. Okay, try is going well, it's not, let's come back and try with a different one. Unfortunately, right now we are still in the learning curve, and there is no like rules about how to do what when doing this. So it's a lot of like experimentation and iteration.
I think that's all. One question that we have is there any beginner courses? There is one more over here. I know like we are already out of time. A follow-up question on RLHF is, how do you decide which feedback is valuable for training? Because there are possibilities of false negatives.
Yeah. You may need some external annotators. So you are taking the feedback from the outside and you are including external or internal annotators to say, okay, this feedback, it's good enough or not. Or even you can use LLMs to evaluate if the feedback is appropriate or not, right? So again, you can automate the process, or you can use people to evaluate the other people. There are like many different approaches, but the best way to go at the beginning is with internal annotators, humans, to evaluate the feedback, and then to the model.
Awesome. I think we'll wrap it up. This was fantastic, fabulous. This was just mind-blowing, Eduardo. And I hope we'll connect one more time to see if we can go a deep dive into fine-tuning or evaluation a little bit more. But we'll plan it out in the future. But this was mind-blowing. One last question over here is there any training courses available? There are tons of them. I'll put some link, and Eduardo, you can also give some link.
I will share with you some courses that for me they were like very useful, because again I'm not a developer right now. They were like very educational, simple to follow. So I will share some links with you.
Yeah. And I heard courses in code.
Yeah.
There was one from AWS, Generative AI in AWS, and that was very good for a beginning, and which covers all these things about like all the different kinds of evaluations. That's all I have. This was wonderful discussion, and thanks everyone for all the interesting questions. Eduardo, thanks for your time. This is mind-blowing.
Pleasure,
And
really pleasure.
it gives us hope that if you want to learn something, teacher will be available. So you just have to show the interest, and people are there to help. So this is wonderful. I hope to connect back with you once again at some point of time. Until then, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Bye-bye. Take care. Bye.